it sounds to me like it's almost bordering on this eugenics policy if you're looking at it on an individual basis. Like, do you want to talk about mass deportation in the meantime while we look at the exact wording? Because
we could, if you would like,
we haven't gotten to,
if you would like to move on, that you've committed, that you're bullshitting, that you haven't given any.
You are just so, you are, I can tell that you did debate in college because all your little rhetorical strategies are very slimy.
Listen, here's the thing. I think that you want to commit mass genocide against white people, black people, men, women, gays, and Christians.
Why?
That's what I think.
But why do you think that?
Because I can tell that that's what you do from the things you've said.
What did I say?
You said those sort of things about those groups.
What did I say?
All sorts of things about those groups.
Can you offer any quotes?
Can we move on? Can we move on? Why are we still on this?
So
you see the absurdity of your position? When you say Trump's going to be bad for human rights because here's a bunch of groups, and he's going to take human rights all these specific groups. I'm like, cool, let's take the one that's been the most prominent talked about, women.
Which is immigrants.
And we've gone through, no, women was the one.
Yeah, immigrants, for sure.
That's not true. That's not true. It was women that was the group. That was the galvanizing effort. That's been ever since Roe v. Wade's been overturned. That's been the galvanizing.
Rob, the biggest issue of this election was immigration. I'm sorry, but this is just revisionist history that you're offering for us right now.
That's not true.
If you ask anybody what the biggest issue is, it's the economy, it's immigration.
Okay, so I want you, this is what you're saying, that the Democrats' message in the last election and in this one, since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, has been, we must protect immigrants. That's what the majority of Kamala Harris's ads were. It wasn't women's right to choose.
No, the issue was about was about immigration. That was the
no. That's what Trump was talking about. But what the Democrats were talking about when they were talking about taking away people's rights, the first group that they were referencing over and over again was women.
Yeah, because they.
So you admit it.
They surrendered to the right-wing framing on immigration. Yeah, I did.
So you admit that I'm correct and you were wrong on this. Got it.
No, so, I don't agree with your framing on this, Rob.
You just said that, yes, that is true. That's the group that Democrats said's rights were going to be taken away the most, but you criticized them for that.
You were trying to say that this is, okay, we're getting way into the meta conversation of this about shit that doesn't matter. Like, all I was objecting to was you saying that this election was all about women losing their rights, okay? This election was about immigrants.
I didn't say that. I said that the group that we're told was going to lose their rights first and foremost were women. That's what the people that say that Trump's going to be disasters for human rights, that's the first group they talk about. You were unable to defend that. You want to move on to immigrants?
Dude, the way that you phrase this, Rob, is just, I can tell that you have been doing this. You have rhetorical skills. You like to have this meta commentary about the debate that frames it for your audience. I just want to talk about the substance with you. Can we stop doing all of this?
Yes, that's what we're doing. You say, if you list 3 particular groups who you think human rights are going to be taken away, why can't I look at one of those groups and interrogate why you think that? Why is it that as soon as I do you say, I don't want to talk about that group? I'm going to move on to another.
For the last 40 minutes, Rob. I have let you do that for 40 minutes.
If you want to move on, I'm sufficiently happy that I proved that you didn't know what you were talking about this women's issue.
This is the meta-narrative that
If you want to move on to...
Can we just... Wait,
so
Rob,
you're having a meta-narrative about the meta-narrative. You're having a meta-narrative about the meta-narrative. If you want to move...
go with the substance.
Okay, do you want to talk about immigrants?
Yes.
Okay, what rights are immigrants being taken away by Trump?
I think that there is a right that you have, right, to be with your family. Okay, if your family is American citizens, right, they were born in this country, you know, if you're working in this country, I don't think that somebody has the right to just forcibly relocate you.
Okay,
you know,
so
you're
to
being
start
a productive member of society. You've got a family here, you've got connections here, you've got a job here, you're paying taxes here. I don't see how anybody has the right to come and remove you from the country.
Okay, so let's start with some baseline stuff. You wouldn't say that anyone has the right to come to this country, correct?
I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on that.
So you don't have a strong opinion as to whether or not the United States has any say in keeping anyone out? You don't have an opinion on that?
No, I mean, I think that, yeah, okay. I think that you should basically be able to regulate immigration to a certain degree, but I don't think it should be so arbitrary. Like, I think that basically you should stop people on the terrorist watch list from coming in, or you should stop people that have like known documented criminal histories of violent crimes, that kind of thing. And so I agree that legal immigration is better than illegal immigration. I think we should increase the amount of legal immigration to disincentivize illegal immigration.
Okay.
That's my stance.
So first, you didn't have a strong stance on if we should be allowed to keep anyone out. Now I'll leave you adjust your position, which your position now, I'm trying to steel man your position. Mm-hmm. We only have the right to keep out people that are known terrorists or violent criminals. Fair position?
Yeah, sure.
So that means anyone. Let's say there's a person who has no connections to the United States whatsoever, and they live in Russia. And we don't have any proof that their connections to violent crime or the evil government of Russia. And they're like, yeah, I want to come to the United States. Mm-hmm. We have no right to say no. They should be allowed to come in.
I think that there is like a human right for for being able to move. You know, you should be able to live where you want to live. I think that that is a great part about human freedom.
So your articulation would be that even if we had a president who would say, yeah, actually, we're going to put a hard cap at 50 million people a year we could leave in. That 51 millionth person, 50 million and one person, if they said, sorry, we can't take any more, we have violated that person's rights, as long as they're not a criminal.
Yeah, I just don't think that's a very realistic situation, but sure, I'll give it to you.
Okay, well then I would say that you have a problem of, you're making a criticism about Trump that literally would be made of every politician in every nation ever. That they would be violating people's rights, because there is no credible politician that would have any effect whatsoever at actually having a thriving country that would say literally anyone, as long as they're not a terrorist or criminal, is allowed in here. That doesn't exist.
But this is all I hear from the right, is that the other side is pushing open borders, and now you're saying that nobody on earth would ever push open borders.
They would. Even the people that are pushing open borders would say that there's certain specific people that they wouldn't want. That's beyond just criminals. That's beyond just criminals.
Like what? Who is undesirable?
Like, for example, even the people that want open borders in this country, like Democrats, wouldn't accept like 3 billion people.
Okay, yeah. Do you think that anybody's advocating for you think I'm advocating for 3 billion people?
Well, if you're saying that it is a human right for anyone who wants to come here to be able to, eventually that would lead to a policy where we would be too filled up and we would have to eventually turn people away. So, which that would mean at that moment you would say...
I don't think that is the case, Rob. I don't think that's logical.
That is certainly the case.
I don't think that eventually we would get to a point where we're just filled up. I don't think that's
Let's go a little further with this. Do you think that the people that come to this country that are immigrants, illegal, legal, whatever, do you think they should be entitled to welfare benefits, such as health care, education, food stamps, WIC if they have kids here?
Some and not others.
Give me an example of the
ones
I know
you really don't like nuance. You want it to be all or nothing here. But I do think, like, for one, they already have healthcare. I worked in operating rooms. We've done surgeries on illegal immigrants. And guess who's paying for it? Not the government.
The illegal immigrant?
No.
Then who?
Basically, the hospital eats the cost and then passes on that cost to private insurance companies that then
we pay more through our insurance.
Yeah, so through private insurance.
Gotcha.
But it's not government programs.
Sure, gotcha. So either way, it's the taxpayers, it's the legal citizens of this country that's paying for it. I want you to give me the examples.
This is the point that I'm going to make, though. Allow me to make my point here, right? Because, yes, okay, like, immigrants do, like, take services up, like healthcare and like education infrastructure and stuff. But when you actually crunch the whole numbers and you look on net, what is the impact, right? You will find that it's basically universal consensus, except for maybe the Heritage Foundation, that like what the numbers actually show. You were talking about that you're big into the data. Like if you're looking at like what the actual numbers show, that tax revenue of all types generated by immigrants, both legal and illegal, exceed the total cost of like the services that they are receiving. So we could get into the data and what number of immigrants should we allow, et cetera, et cetera. That's different than what your criticism of Trump is, which is that he would be bad for human rights. And so when we asked specifically on women, we went through that conversation. Now we're on immigrants. And so when asked specifically, what are the rights that you're talking about? You basically say the right to travel and live where you want.
as long as you're not a criminal.
So I'll explain to you exactly what I see as a violation of human rights, right? So if you're a family, you're a mixed household, right? Some people in the household are.
That's not what you're already getting
You've
off
given
track.
me so many hypotheticals that I've listened to, Rob.
No. You're already getting off track because here's the deal.
I'm not getting off track.
This is what you're going to do. We're trying to broaden. No, what we're trying to do is
filibustering me now.
Okay, you can talk. I'll tell everyone what you're going to do. You're going to now go from the principle of what the right should be to talk about, but this person who has a family here and he's working hard and he's paying taxes, that's a violation of his right to kick him out. I understood. You said
That's
that
not
initially.
what I was gonna say.
Okay, then you go ahead and talk, and then I'll be able to explain. I'm predicting what you're going to do is get more specific than rather talk about the general principle of what the human right is. Go ahead.
Okay, Rob, isn't that what you've been doing to me all night
No.
with your hypotheticals? You're saying, oh, well, what would you be okay with 3 billion people? Oh, what about this highly specific instance of like a woman's health? Like you've been going into some very specific hypothetical examples with me all night. So I'm going to do this one time here, okay? You have a mixed household. Some are documented, some are not. The ICE or National Guard or whoever the Trump administration comes, knocks on the door, says, hey, like, we've heard you have an undocumented worker here, John or whatever. They take John, and then while they're there, they're like, oh, hey, like, do you have any other, like, we want to see everybody's papers. Now, all of a sudden, oh, Abuela doesn't have her papers, and Uncle Ricky doesn't have his papers, and they're splitting the household apart. I consider that to be a violation of human rights, and I think it's pretty gross. I don't know what your specific takes are on a circumstance like that. Do you just think that that's not going to happen, or do you acknowledge that circumstances just like that are going to be happening with any mass deportation policy, and that's super fucked up and bad?
So as predicted, what he did was go to the specific when the entire point was when he first started to talk about the specific, I said, okay, if we're talking about the general principle of violating someone's human rights, what is that right? What is the right that we're violating? And I started with the position that I thought he would clearly agree with me, and he didn't. I said, well, clearly there are circumstances when governments should be allowed to say, we're allowed to control who comes in and who comes out. He said, I'm not sure, I don't have strong feelings on that. And then he said, okay, just the people that are criminals. So the violation of the right that he's talking about is specifically your right to live wherever you want. I started to talk about welfare and things like that to kind of articulate how non-tenable that would be for a society if you say anyone who wants to come here should be allowed to come here, regardless of what those numbers of people would be, and we'll give them free services, because that would encourage millions upon millions of people to come to the point that it would eventually become untenable. That's the direction we were going. He skips from that. He says, no. Now I want to go back to the specific and talk about this one heart-wrenching story that would be a specific. But the entailment would be that any policy that any leader had that would say, yeah, we're going to control our border to some degree, would in his estimation be taking away the rights, the human rights of these people. So you can see when he criticizes the taking away of human rights, his interpretation will be so broad that it would basically mean anyone that would be any sort of reasonable leader would be violating rights. Now he wants to talk about the specific scenario, and he'll say, but this specific scenario is violating rights worse. Well, this would be similar to me saying a bunch of things. We shouldn't have laws that for crimes that are nonviolent then. For example, non-payment of child support shouldn't exist. Why? Because if we arrest someone for non-payment of child support, then we're ripping someone away from their family.
Are you getting too specific now with your examples, Rob?
What I'm doing,
on to me about that.
Well, that's because I've now delved into the specific.
Oh, no, yeah. Now you have a
delved
good reason.
into. If I say to you,
that's specific, but I can't.
No, that's not what's going on. What you're talking about a human right, the impetus is on you when you're saying this guy is a danger because he'll harm human rights. And I say, what right? And you're like, this guy. This one guy, like, imagine how ridiculous that would be. If I said, well, I think, if I said this, Kamala Harris will violate human rights. And you're like, well, give me an example. And I say, right to free speech. And you're like, give me an example. And I say, my friend Larry, you know what happened? He made a meme online and the FBI under Biden came and visited him. So that Larry, and you'll be like, okay, but what's the general principle that you're talking about? Larry, I'm talking about Larry. You would be like, but what is that principle? Should
Rob,
you be allowed to say?
illustrate-
And so you would say things like this. In order to come to some agreement, what we're talking about, you might say, well, let's start with this. Do you have the right to say whatever you want online? Or do you think there should be some governmental limitations? For example, you can't be.
This is mind-numbing, dude.
It is not mind-numbing. It is clear.
Please, man.
It is clear. It is clear
to make your points.
No.
You bring up so many examples to make your points that you could make succinctly, man.
You can't understand the succinct point. You're incapable of understanding it, or you're willfully pretending you don't.
You are having an issue with me illustrating a point with an example, but you do it every time you open your mouth.
Not. It's okay to illustrate a point with an example, but I'm asking you what the principle that you're advocating for. It is a human rights violation to what is that right? And the right that you're saying is the right for any person who wants to come here to come here. That's okay. Listen, just real quick.
Complaints about
how loud fuck you and your audience. I'll yell all I want. And if you want to put smug, I could put smug things up on the channel too for my audience to see what a disingenuous prick you are and how you're not a very good debater. So I can put those up if you want. If your audience doesn't like my yelling or you think that it's something that you don't care for, you're free to leave at any point. No problem whatsoever. Now, the point is, when we're talking about the specific principle of human right that's being violated, yes or no, you're saying it's that right for any person to come here if they want and live here. Yes or no? As long as they're not a criminal.
I don't know. If you want to give me the specific right that will be violated by mass deportations, I would say that it's the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Do you define the right to life as a person, as long as they're not a criminal, anyone who wants to come live here?
No.
But that's what you said earlier. Why are you changing your position?
Because, man, quite frankly, talking with you is a lot more annoying than I thought it would be. I thought we could have a discussion that would be like two normal human adults having a discussion with this. And the way that you talk about things is just to try to use small, insignificant points to try to score rhetorical points to make it sound like your overarching points make sense when they just don't. When we're talking about mass deportations, we're talking about what that actually looks like. And you're trying to make the point, or at least you seem like you're trying to make the point, that you can do a mass deportation without gross violations of human rights. Because you're saying, well, look, you need to articulate what specific human rights will be violated. But I really don't think that you hold this position. In actuality, I think you're just trying to score little rhetorical points in this debate.
That's not true. That's not true.
Okay. Then if it's not true, then do you really think that you can do a mass deportation without violating human rights?
We'll get to that point here.
I want to hear you answer
I will answer that. Yes, I do. Just like you could arrest people without violating human rights if they break a law. So, for example, there is something that we could feel tragic. We could say you have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when it comes to living with your family. You do not have the right to take your family, move into your house, and say, fuck you, we all live here now. And if the cops come to remove me, I say that's a violation of my rights. You're removing me from my family. Right? Now, let me talk specifically about what you're doing here. If I was to say, I think if Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or whatever else would get elected, they would take away my human right to self-defense. And you said, well, how do you define a right to self-defense? Do you think that you should be allowed to have nuclear weapons? And I said, well, I don't know. You would be like, wait, what? So you're saying that any limitation on weapons whatsoever would be a violation of your rights? That seems to be a relevant discussion between two people. You have to have a baseline to understand what you're talking about. It wouldn't be sufficient of me to say, well, it would be a violation of human rights because they might say that this one specific gun I have shouldn't be allowed to have with a bump stock. And you'd be like, but what is that right that's being violated? There's a disagreement you have. You think there's a policy disagreement for sort of practical applications that you would disagree with. But is that a violation of your human rights? What is the principle that you're talking about? It's the same thing here. When you're talking about taking away the rights, because you had just said, you would agree, this is where the debate becomes. We all have a right, for example, to freely associate and talk to the people we want, right? You have a First Amendment right. You agree with that?
Okay.
But if we go to prison, some of those rights are taken away.
You can lose your rights. I agree.
Right. So then the argument that we're making is if the human right is anyone has the right to be here, then you're right. If that's how you define the human right, then yes, kicking anyone out would be a violation of their rights. If your argument is separating people from their family is a human rights violation, now we're talking about something different because I could say, well, there are times when that wouldn't be a human rights violation.
Well, let me clarify then. My point is that the human rights violations that come with mass deportations, like the separating from family or whatever, are disproportionate to the crime. So I do agree that you can commit crimes where a proportionate response would be to violate your rights and separate you from your family or whatever, like horrible, violent crimes. I do agree in principle that you can, it makes sense to violate your rights if you commit a terrible enough crime. What we are differentiating about is that I don't think illegally immigrating is a bad enough crime to warrant such a punishment. You do. That is the source of our disagreement.
Now we're getting, this is what I thought you would say initially. That's why I started from a baseline. And this sort of stuff's necessary to have in a discussion because, like, let's assume that you're a complete communist that believes in big government and I'm a complete ANCAP, right? You would say, well, clearly, Rob, you would think sometime it should be, like, illegal to murder people. And I'm like, no. Okay, well, then that's where the debate needs to go. So I thought you would have the reasonable position of course, not everyone who wants to come here can come here. There's certain, yes, of course, our government has the right to say, we're going to allow the people we want in and not the people. And then the conversation would go to, so clearly there's times where we could do things like that. So now let's talk specifically about what's going on and whether or not. I disagree with you. You're having a threshold issue here. You're saying the crime of kicking someone out is disproportionate, or the solution of kicking someone out is disproportionate to the crime of coming here illegally. Yes. I disagree. That is the exact punishment. If you do something, that would be like saying the crime of stealing something from a shop, the punishment of forcing me to put it back is too much. Totally disagree.
Well, so the reason why, right, is that, like, one, I think that the punishment of deportation harms the country as a whole.
But that's different. Real quick, that's different than rights. That's saying that practically it's a bad idea.
I understand that's different than rights. I'm saying, like, in the scenario where somebody steals something and you're asking what is the proper punishment for that, it makes sense that the punishment would be for them to give it back, because that's, like, you know, there's multiple economic and moral reasons to justify that. In this case, I think that there's not economic reasons to justify deportation. In fact, it is an economic ill for the country. It's good for the country to have more immigrants. You're saying, oh, well, we'll just fill up the whole country. Like, if you look historically, the number one determining factor in how successful a nation is in its geopolitical position is its rate of population increase. That's just this history, right? If you want America to be the number one superpower, we need to grow our population. We can't do it with our natural birth rates alone, right? So again, just from the position of having America's best interests in mind, economically, geostrategically, immigration, legal and illegal, is good. I just want more legal immigration, less illegal. I think we should incentivize these things differently. That's where I'm coming from in terms of that. In terms of the proper punishment for illegal immigrants, I think that punishment needs to be not harmful to the country, not harmful to America. I don't think it makes sense to harm the country to punish illegal immigrants.
So notice what happened here. This is a completely different conversation than rights. So saying you're violating someone's human rights, let's go back to the shoplifting example. Let's say I shoplift from you. You own a shop. Or better yet, you just have a home, right? And I steal your car, right? And you weren't using your car for the next week. You were going to do something, but I steal it. But then I get it refurbished and I bring it back a week later. Would you say, oh, well, it was of benefit to me, so I'm okay that he stole my car. It shouldn't be a crime. Would you say that?
Yeah, you asked the strangest hypothetical. So in this scenario, my car is stolen, but they actually make my car way better and return it to me?
Yes.
And so over this last week, I've just been suffering by not knowing where my car is and having to deal with not having a car for a week.
Yes. Should it be a crime?
Then I would say overall the benefit was less than the downsides. So if it might have been a cost benefit scenario, the benefit that they gave me is not worth the cost.
I think that that's a terrible way to look at how law should apply, right? Because the idea then, because what happens is then all of a sudden you'll get into subjective reasoning. Well, who defines what's good and bad? Some cases you could say, well, yeah, clearly if you refurbish the car, but what if I refurbished it in a way that I thought was great and it increased the value?
This is a stupid hypothetical.
It's not stupid because it's getting to the core belief. No, it's not. The reason this isn't stupid is you just said something. You just said that we should allow people to break the law as long as we can articulate that it's beneficial to the rest of us. And so therefore, that's what you just said, right? And I'm articulating I'm exactly opposite of that. Because what's going to happen is when we're talking about how are these people's rights being violated, you've already said, yes, in certain circumstances, if people break the law, then we could take away things that we would normally call their rights, but it's justified because they broke the law, right? You're just saying that you think that the punishment at this point is more severe than the crime. I say no. I think the punishment of coming here illegally, or the crime of coming here illegally, the punishment should be to send you back. That seems to be a reciprocal punishment to what that should be. Then when I'm like, so how does this affect rights? All you do is talk about the economic benefit. I'm more than happy to have a discussion about economic benefit, but it should not be contingent on whether or not someone's rights are being violated, if whether or not they benefit the economy of this country. It is not a violation of someone's rights to kick them out if they broke the law. You might say it's practically a bad solution because it'll financially harm the country, but that's different than saying that it's violating their rights.
Let me push back on this a little bit because I used to be in favor of the death penalty. I thought like for like child offenders and stuff, I used to be in favor of the death penalty for that. But then I got into an argument with somebody who did like professional counseling and therapy of sex offenders for a living. And they gave me a very good explanation for like why that doesn't make any sense. And so in that instance, they were able to convince me that the punishment was not good at addressing the crime, even though morally I thought it makes sense. You know, this person's a danger to society, just nix them out of society, get them out of there. Morally, it made sense to me, but they gave an argument from pragmatics, from economics that convinced me that the death penalty is not good for the nation as a whole, for our economy. That is what convinced me there. So I think like, yeah, you can say, oh, well, Grayson, the first word that Grayson said was human rights. So everything else that he says doesn't matter. And like all his economic arguments are not pertinent at all because they're not human rights. But again, I do think that the economic matters should factor into our punishments for crimes. It's not all just,
I'm not, but you're misunderstanding me.
And they need to be kicked out. I want to look at the whole picture.
You're misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding me. You could make it is a separate tier of arguments to make pragmatic economic arguments when discussing whether or not someone should be removed from the country. That's different. You may say, look, the reason we shouldn't remove these people is because it would harm us economically. And actually, because our birth rates are declining, we need these certain amounts of people, right? You may make that argument. That's a different argument I'm willing to have. That's absolutely fine. That's a different argument than we shouldn't be allowed to kick these people out because of human rights. Human rights shouldn't be contingent on the pragmatism of whether or not these specific people help the economy. You don't really have a good answer as to why it is violating someone's human rights if they broke the law to remove them from the country.
I do. Let me try to give you the answer again, right? I think that you already know it, but like, look, the punishment should fit the crime. Again, this is our disagreement. I don't think that the crime is deserving of a punishment of deportation. You do. That's our source of disagreement. Like for me, like you're saying, well, they broke the law, so they need the punishment. But like if you get a speeding ticket, that doesn't make sense for them to deport your family for it. Like it has to be making sense.
It does make sense.
I know that you think that is disanalogous because I've gone to absurd degrees with it. But to me, the crime of illegal entry doesn't fit the punishment of deportation because it's a punishment for everyone. It punishes the entire nation and the economy.
So what? We could say that about a litany of other things, and it's not a violation of this.
I think it's bad to punish the entire nation and the economy.
But that's not a question. That's not a question of their rights being violated. Again, I'll repeat: if I get arrested for non-payment of child support and I'm taken away from my wife and child, is that punishing my wife and child?
If you're okay,
I have a child to another woman. I don't pay child support. So they send my ass to jail. Now I can't be out there making money for the other woman and child. And isn't that a punishment to my current wife and her child?
I do actually think that is a punishment that is too severe to the crime.
So my human rights would have been violated.
Yeah, I do think that was too severe for the crime.
It's an outrageous statement to have.
No, okay, look. Okay, I don't think that we should all be punished because somebody immigrated illegally.
But that has nothing to do with rights.
Punished because immigration, legal or illegal, is a net benefit for the country. The vast majority of economists agree with that on both sides of the political aisle.
Not true.
It is true.
It's
Like a
okay.
little an
Okay.
interdisciplinary, like a across both sides, a congressional budgetary office analysis showed, like this is Republican and Dems in 2007 under the Bush administration. They were showing that illegal and legal immigration has more economic benefits than
Okay,
negatives.
two questions. So now, if we want to switch from the rights argument to the economic argument, no problem with that. Two questions I
I
have.
can still do the rights argument,
Two
but
questions I have on this, right? One, then if we could prove that a specific person or a specific subsect of people are economically detrimental to us, should we be allowed to remove them?
you're meaning like
Me and you're both illegal. We both have families. You bust your ass. You go to work every day. You're a contributing member of society. You're on the local, volunteer fire team. You're doing a bunch of good shit for your community. I'm a layabout. I get drunk sitting on the stoop every day. I'm living off government expenditures, et cetera, et cetera. Should they, if the government does an analysis and says Rob Noerr is a drain on our
I
economy,
see,
he's
I
here
see.
illegally, we could remove him, but we're not going to remove Grayson. Is my
Yeah.
human rights been violated?
Yeah, this is actually a very good point. I appreciate you bringing this up. Because I don't think that we should just deport homeless people. Those are homeless U.S. citizens. In terms of like illegal, undocumented people that don't have a job, they're an economic drain on the country. My initial gut, like my initial moral intuition is that I don't think that we should deport those people, but I don't have as much of a logical, like empirical justification for that. Those are just my moral intuitions about it.
So then, if the Trump administration starts by deporting people that have already been given deportation orders and criminals, you'd be okay with that. As long as it doesn't go further than that, correct?
To deport like people that are already in jails and
Well,
like have committed
so the
violent
two,
crimes.
yes, the people that are illegals that have already committed violent crimes, or whether they're in
Yeah.
jail or not,
I wouldn't.
or
I would not have an issue
okay,
with
and the
deporting
second
like
group,
actual violent criminals that are here illegally.
right? So there's an illegal, they do a terrible assault to a woman. I don't know TOS what you're allowed to say.
We don't. We don't really need any like example. I already agreed with you.
Okay, so that person's gone, whether they're already in jail or not. What about the person that's already been given deportation orders?
Well, what crime did they do?
Well, for example, when people come for asylum seeking or other things, they're supposed to go to a hearing and then they determine whether or not the claim for asylum was legitimate
Yeah.
or not. Sometimes the courts say, no, it's not legitimate, you have to leave. But people just
Okay.
don't show up to leave. Should those
Okay.
people be deported? They have a chance. They know that they've been told, dude, you got to go. They haven't been here 20, 30 years, and they're just like, nah, I'm not going to go. Should we be allowed to deport those people?
Um, it's a gray area for me. Because I understand arguments both for and against. Like, if you argue that they should stay because they could be productive members of society, or they're the only crime that they did was a non-violent crime. I understand that argument. Also understand the argument that you could be potentially incentivizing more people to do that. And so it's more of a gray area for me. I don't know if I would be able to give you a firm stance on that.
I don't know how that could be gray, because then the lesson is anyone that comes could get in. Because
Yeah,
what's
like
going
I
to
said,
our court
I
would
think-
say, no, you can't be here, and they'd say, yeah, I'm going to stay, and you'd be like, oh well, what can we do?
So specifically, I think that we should incentivize legal immigration by making the legal immigration process easier than the illegal process. Because the illegal process sucks for a lot of people. It's expensive. You have to deal with coyotes. It's dangerous. People don't want to do that. They'd rather go legally, but there's, for whatever reason, they think that they can't get in the legal process. So I think we should make the legal process easier to disincentivize the illegal
But
process.
that's irrelevant to what we should do with the people that are here illegally. And if we can't even agree, for example, even if
So I think
let
that
me-
there,
let me-
there should be a
let me-
path for citizenship for those people that like, basically, here's the thing: to discourage future incentivization. At the same time, when you make legal immigration easier, that process easier, then you also provide a pathway to citizenship for the people that are already here, while saying in the future, everyone that comes, will not get that same opportunity, to disincentivize it from happening in the future.
That's unpersuasive to me, and I think the majority of Americans that would say, oh, okay, everyone that's here has complete amnesty, even those that the courts have already ruled should be removed. You're all here. You're in, unless you committed a super violent crime. Other than that, you're in. But now trust us, now that we've given what the very people that allowed these illegals to come in the first place wanted by saying, oh, and we're going to massively open up legal, the rest of the people, that just, it's not persuasive. And then I'll go further with this.
Wait, why is it not persuasive, though? Because isn't it logical, or what is illogical about it?
It's not logical because you can't tell people that have literally been given deportation orders that they don't have to leave. And that's
what is illogical about it?
Because if we have a court that says that we've already told you that you can't be here, and we say that's irrelevant, we don't care, as long as we give people like you the immigration policy that you want. Because imagine, we go exactly with Grayson's numbers. Grayson says, okay, I've looked into this, I've spent a year studying it. Here's exactly what our new legal immigration should be. And it's going to increase legal immigration by 95%. And it's going to make it so much easier. It'll only take 2 weeks for the people to apply. But there will still be people that are left out. And then someone's going to say, I care about human rights more than Grayson. These people should have been kept out. So if they come here illegally, we should allow those people to stay and then readjust the immigration system to one I want. So
but I failed to see how any of that showed that what I said was not logical. Because like you're giving me a slippery slope argument, which is a fallacy.
It's not a fallacy. The logical nature is this. If our courts already said you have to go, and you say no, they shouldn't have to go, even when the courts, we shouldn't be allowed to remove them, unless you have the specific policy that I want, which would allow that person in, then we'll say, okay.
Right, but Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for a while, and then those laws changed. So why would the court mandating a deportation, but then the legislation introduces this new legal process and naturalizes citizens that are here? It's
terrible policy. It incentivizes. Okay, so let's just say, will you agree with this? There's zero chance in the next 4 years that we get the immigration policy that you want.
Yeah.
So practically, anyone who comes here illegally for the next 4 years, even if a court says you can't be here, you would say it would be wrong to remove them.
Not anybody, but
if they're not a violent criminal, you would say yes.
The non-violent criminals.
Okay, that's absurd. What you've just done is incentivize the entire world's population that is a non-violent criminal to come here. Now, what we were doing was going through the stages of severity, right? So I thought the people that had already
wait. What's wrong with having non-violent criminals come here?
We don't want to incentivize everyone. I'll explain it if you let me get to my next point.
Okay.
The core principle that I have is this government exists for the rights of the citizens of this country. And it is just an extension of our will. And so therefore, we are completely legitimate to say we only want people to come into this country that are beneficial to us. So what I was doing is, you already admitted, yeah, it's a difficult question if Rob's the illegal that's a net drain, whether or not we should kick them out. So what I was doing was going incrementally. You agree with the terrorists, those people kicked out, the violent criminals. Yes, I'm glad you agree with that. That's sensible. The next level of severity is the people that have come here in like the past couple of years that have already been given deportation orders. You say no, they should be allowed to stay, which shocks me. Now let's go to the next level of severity. Should our government be able to look on a case-by-case basis and say, you're a net drain, you're out, you're good, you stay? That's what our immigration policy shouldn't exist because we owe the world something and that there is a human right for anyone who wants to live here to live here. Our immigration policy should be one that's designed to benefit the people of this country. And so if this person comes and we say, yes, that person will benefit, then we allow them in. But if this person comes and we say, no, this person's going to be a net drain, then they are not allowed in. That's what a sensible immigration policy is.
So I think I understand in principle with you right there, because I think that overall, immigration is a net benefit on average, but I see what you're saying where it could be even more beneficial if you were to take the people that are not benefiting and say they can't come or deport them or whatever. Like, it starts to get to a weird situation with me when you're looking at it like on a point by point basis like that. Because then it's like,
do you understand how we come to this? Because we're talking about this discussion of rights, and then you're like, but these people are beneficial economically. Okay, let's say I agree with you. But surely we could see, even if 80% of these people are good economically, you'll be able to pick out specific people within them that aren't beneficial to us economically.
Yeah, I agree.
So the question
there are going to be some that are more beneficial and others that are maybe not.
Is it a human rights violation for us to say, no, you're a net drain, you're gone?
Yeah, it's just like you know that saying about like the greatness of a society is how you treat the members of your society that are not, I forget the whole thing, but it's about like elderly and disabled people and all that stuff. Like it sounds to me like it's almost bordering on this eugenics policy if you're looking at it on an individual basis. Like typically when you make laws for populations, not on an individual basis. So like this policy of like let's look at the individual and see if they get to be beneficial, this individual can stay. If they're going to be a net drain on the system, they leave. That is almost approaching this like, oh well, if your baby is going to be born special needs, then you should get rid of it, like kind of stuff.
No, that's not doing that whatsoever because we're already the equivalent. Like we do this all the time with all sorts of things, right? We decide whether or not something. For example, we're giving a business permit. The United States decides whether or not they want to get into a business relationship with a foreign-owned company. We
Mm-hmm.
don't say we must accept being in a business relation with any foreign-owned country. Of course not. We say, well,
Yeah.
will this business arrangement be beneficial for the United States?
Yeah.
We're not like you have to understand, of course, when it comes to people that are citizens of this country, you can't do shit like that. You can't be like, yeah, we're going to deport you because we think you're a next strain. But when we're talking about people that came here illegally or the people that we're going to get left in, why shouldn't we as citizens be allowed to say, we're only going to leave people in that we think will be beneficial? Now, maybe
So wait. Can I answer that real quick?
Sure.
So the way I'm thinking of it is, like, I guess, a little bit different. I understand what you're saying, though. But I'm just thinking, like, the thing that I find wrong is, like, the disruption of people's lives that they've built here, right? Like, if they're legal or not legal, the thing that I find wrong about deporting somebody, like you're saying, oh, of course we can't do that to U.S. citizens because they're U.S. citizens. Like, to me, we can't do that to people because it's wrong, because you're disrupting their lives and their livelihoods. Like, to you, it's only wrong to do that to a citizen, but it's fine to do that to someone that's not a
That
citizen.
broke the law in that very way of coming here. Yes.
Yeah, and to me, like, I'm just like looking at the situation on the ground. They look the same, right? In terms of what's happening on the ground, I wouldn't be, like, if I would just a fly on the wall, you wouldn't be able to tell if that's a citizen or not a citizen if you're just watching somebody
What's
who's
the relevancy in
getting
that?
alive get
You can't
deported.
tell who's a credit card scammer or who's not. So you don't arrest the credit card scammer because just looking at them you can't tell? Of course not.
No. My point is basically like, if you were going to go after the credit card scammer, right? Like, and you are prosecuting them for the crime, okay? You can look at that and you can see them doing that to like an innocent person and ruining their life. Those are going to be different situations. You agree, correct?
If someone
Like,
gets falsely arrested, but that's not analogous. The analogy that would be analogous to someone getting deported that's not an illegal. Yes, we
yeah,
would agree that's bad.
yeah,
But what
I'm
you're
saying like
what
there's a clear difference in those two scenarios, because in the one instance for the guy doing the credit card fraud, like the disruption in their life, like it is going to be different than the person who's innocent. The disruption in the life of someone who's a citizen versus not a citizen, what is the difference of like the in terms of the household that they've established, the family they've had, the job that
again,
they have
this
in
is
this
the
country?
same argument with the credit card scammer. What's the
Can you
difference in
walk
there?
me through why it's the same argument?
I've scammed people through credit cards. You haven't. The police walk through. They don't know anything about us. They're just looking at our houses. Can they tell looking at my house, credit card scammer, and then looking at your house, he's not?
No, they would
But
obviously
I
have to look at it more detailed
but
than that.
I've built a life. I have a family. I have
Mm-hmm.
neighbors that like me. I have dogs. I have guinea pigs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be right to punish me. What we're talking about specifically is, of course, any innocent person that gets caught up in something's terrible, but we're talking about people that have violated our policies and laws. And
Mm-hmm.
even though you might say, but they look the same as the guy who didn't violate the policies and law, it doesn't change the fact they violated that policy or law. And it is a legitimate punishment to say, you can't be here. We're going to send you home. If you want to come back the legal way, you could attempt, but you came here illegal. To say, but they look the same as the person who didn't break the law isn't an argument.
Yeah, I just think like if I'm looking at the situation playing out on the ground and I cannot tell a difference, and I consider one of them like you consider one of them to be morally wrong and the other one to be morally right, but when you're actually looking at the situation play out, on the ground, you cannot tell the difference between the situation that's morally wrong and the situation that's morally right. I think you could tell the difference in the credit card scammer example. I think you could, if you're watching those two processes play out, I think you could tell the example of the credit card scammer versus the guy who's not.
That's outrageous. Not only do I can
Really?
prove that that's bullshit. You know how many times they find serial killers that everyone's like, oh my God, we had no idea. He seemed like a normal guy. If you can't tell who's a serial killer, how in the hell can you say that you would be able to walk through a community and point out everyone who's committed a crime like credit card scam? That's absurd. Everyone knows
really
that's not
don't
true.
think that this is analogous. So you're saying that, like, the arrest and prosecution of a serial killer versus somebody that's innocent and accused of the crime of serial killing, you would not be able to tell the difference between those if you were just a fly on the wall watching those play out?
What,
Like, you wouldn't be able to see that there's a lack of evidence in the first one?
well, now you're changing. You're saying once we investigate and find proof that someone's a serial killer.
Isn't that
right,
part of the process?
right, but that's part of the process of finding the people that are illegal. But your
But, like,
argument
it
is
doesn't matter to me. Like, in the illegal versus not legal, no matter how much they investigate, it doesn't change the situation on the ground. Like, it does change for the murderer one.
I don't understand. I think the point you're trying, it doesn't make sense what you're saying, because your argument seems to be because family A, you know, the Smiths, and family B, you know, the Robinsons. Well, it turns out the Smiths are illegal and the Robinsons aren't.
Yeah.
But just looking, you can't tell, right? But if the Smiths committed credit
No,
card
wait.
fraud and the
It wasn't just like the families. You can't tell who's illegal and who's not illegal. I'm talking about specifically the process of deportation. Like, they're both getting deported. One of them has documentation, the other one doesn't. And, like, you can clearly, you know, you can see, but the actual dynamics on the ground of the process being carried out,
this is the same for any
equally
crime.
morally wrong.
This is the same for any crime. Any crime theoretically.
I don't think it is, though.
How? How would you know the difference until you have proof?
No, but that's the thing, though. It's like I'm accounting for the entire investigation process and the process of amassing the evidence in my
I'm just gonna have to say I have no idea what you're talking about. If your argument is because people that are illegal don't look like illegals, therefore
that's not my argument.
Okay, then I don't know what you're saying. Do you want to
I'm
move on
saying
to another
the
point?
actual process of carrying out the mass deportations is what I find to be a violation of human rights, whether or not the person is documented or not documented. And I'm saying that the actual process of prosecuting a serial killer is not analogous because that process does have differences in the moral character if that person is guilty or innocent as part of the process of the investigation.
The serial killer analogy was just to prove that you can't tell that someone committed a crime by looking at them. That seemed to be what you were suggesting. Okay, do you want to move on to something else?